This is 1-3, solving equations by multiplying or dividing. So just as when we had addition, we used subtraction, and when we had subtraction, we used addition. These are inverse operations. It's the same idea here. If we have multiplication, in order to get rid of multiplication, we can divide. In order to get rid of division, we will multiply. So let's take a look at, see what this looks like. In example 1a, -4 equals 1/2 times x. That 1/2 x is multiplication. So in order to get this x by itself here, we are going to need to divide both sides by 1/2. Now some people know that when you divide fractions, the real rule, instead of doing -4 divided by 1/2, you multiply by the reciprocal. You multiply by 2/1. So some people, when they're dealing with fractions, like to skip a step. Instead of dividing by 1/2, since it's a fraction here, they know right away to multiply by the reciprocal, to multiply both sides by 2/1. Well, 2/1 is really just 2. So I can multiply both sides by 2, and I get -8 equals x. I can plug that back in and make sure that I'm correct, especially with fractions, because we're a little worried usually about fractions in our answers. So if we have 1/2 of the x value, -8, well, 1/2 of -8 is -4, so this is correct. Okay, in example B, we have y divided by 3 equals 5. Well, if this is division of 3, then I'm going to multiply both sides by 3. And so I get y equals 5 times 3 is 15. Another way to think of this y/3 would be the same thing as having a 1 in front of that, like 1/3 y. These are actually equivalent to each other. Y/3 is equal to 1/3 y, and so to get rid of the reciprocal of 1/3, we would multiply both sides by 3, which is what we really did here. So y equals 15 is correct, and you can plug that 15 into the y spot. Well, 15 divided by 3 is 5, so that's definitely correct. Now for 3z/4 equals 6. Well, there's two things we can do. 3/4, this is the same thing as 3/4 z. So we can divide by 3/4 or multiply by the reciprocal, 4/3. Those cancel on that side, times 4/3 here, and z equals, put 6/1. So 24/3, well, 24/3 simplifies to 8. 24 divided by 3 is 8. And this makes sense. If you put the 8 in that z, 3 times 8 is 24, then divide by 4, which equals 6. So that's correct. So another option on this one, 3/4 z equals 6. Some people like to eliminate, oops, sorry, the bar was kind of like this. But some people like to eliminate the fraction right away. So they would start by, instead of that division of 4, we multiply both sides by 4. And then you end up with 3z equals 24. And now, to get rid of the multiplying of 3, we divide both sides by 3, and z equals 8. So you have a few options on these problems. You're just going to have to find what works for you. And check your work. Okay, example 2, 39 equals -3r. Well, in order to get r by itself, I have to get rid of that times -3 by dividing both sides by -3. The reason why I know that it's -3, not +3, is -3 divided by -3 is +1r. We want this to be a positive r, or it's not isolated. So anyway, 39 divided by -3 is -13 equals r. You can plug that back in. -3, so this r right here, -3 times -13 is +39, so that's correct. For 6x equals 48, to get rid of the times 6, we'll divide both sides by 6, and x equals 8. Plug that back in to check. 6 times 8 is 48, so we're good there. And then to isolate y here, it's being multiplied by 7, so I'm going to divide both sides by 7. And y equals 15/7. Now I don't want to divide that because it doesn't divide in evenly, and I know that the fraction is simplified, so I'm just going to leave it this way. I really don't use mixed numbers at this point in algebra, so let's keep it as an improper fraction. Okay, for example 3, we have a couple options again. So first of all, I really want you to notice that I'm trying to isolate this y right there. And I have times 8/3 stuck to it, so I can divide both sides by 8/3 as an option. Well, remember that dividing by 8/3 is the same as multiplying by a reciprocal, so I can multiply both sides by 3/8, the flip of 8/3. and then I end up with y equals, and I can have a couple options here. I can multiply straight across. 4 times 3 is 12, over 6 times 8 is 48, and then simplify that. Or I can cross simplify. So 4 and 8 become 1/2, and 3 and 6 becomes 1/2. And now, going straight across, 1 times 1 is 1, and 2 times 2 is 4, and so y equals 1/4. That's one option. For this one, I'm going to show you another way. So if it's 8 over 3y equals 4 over 6. One option you have is to just eliminate this fraction first. Multiply both sides by 3. And this is really 3 over 1. To make things easier, I'm going to cross simplify. 4 and 1 are already simplified, and 3 and 6 will become 1 over 2. And so what I'm left with is that 8 still, 8y equals, and then I can multiply straight across. 4 times 1 is 4, and 2 times 1 is 2. Well, 4 over 2 is 2, so if I want to make my life easier here, I'm going to change that to 2. Okay, now 8y equals 2, so to get y by itself, I would divide both sides by 8, and y equals 2/8, but I can't leave my answer that way because this can be simplified. I can divide both of those by 2, and I get y equals 1/4. So you really kind of have to find what works for you, because notice those are both the same answers. Okay, in example B, I have two options. I can multiply by the reciprocal, which would be multiplying both sides by 4/5. Or I can eliminate the fraction right away. I can multiply both sides by 4 so that cancels. And then I get 5z equals 40. Now I can divide both sides by 5 to get rid of that multiplication, and z equals 8, and I can plug that back in and make sure that works. So 5 times 8 is 40, divided by 4 is 10, so that works. Okay, and in example C, I can either multiply, here's my variable that I'm solving for, it's times 1/7. So to get rid of that, I can multiply by the reciprocal if I want to, because it's really dividing by 1/7, but when we divide fractions, we multiply by the reciprocal. So I could multiply both sides by 7. My other option is to eliminate the fraction right away. Well, to get rid of the fraction, it's division by 7 right now, so I am going to multiply both sides by 7. Remember that 7 is really 7 over 1. So when I multiply on the left, this part right here, I can cross simplify, but it doesn't change anything. So then 7 times -1 is -7 over 1 times 6 is 6. Equals 1x. Well, I don't have to write the 1, so I can just write equals x. Okay, on to example 4. I just edited that. A group of 13 to 15-year-old girls were surveyed. 225, or about 9/10 of the girls, said they talk on the telephone while they watch TV. About how many girls were surveyed? Well, key words here. The word of means to multiply, so let's keep that in mind. Let's say that x represents the amount of girls surveyed, the total amount. And let's see, we have got 9/10 of the girls that were surveyed. So of the girls, x equal 225. Okay, from there, we can solve. So we have two options. We can eliminate the fraction right away by multiplying both sides by 10, or we can multiply by the reciprocal, which would be 10/9, the flip of 9/10. So we can multiply both sides by 10/9, and x equals, let me make this smaller. We can cross simplify here. 225 and 9, they're both divisible by 9. 9 divided by 9 is 1. 225 divided by 9 is 25. Okay, and then my other diagonal, 10 and 1, are already simplified. So now I can multiply straight across. 25 times 10, I'm just going to add a 0 to that, is 250 over 1 times 1. So 250 girls were surveyed.